Welcome on back to the GSMC Football Podcast, everybody. My name is Matthew Quinn. I am, of course, your host for the evening. And once again, we are also always brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I want to thank you guys all for joining me today. And I want to also just offer a quick apology for those of you who were expecting a show last night. We had some technical difficulties that I ran into, and I was unable to record a show last night. So I apologize for anyone who was looking forward to that show, but we're going to go ahead and do the show that we were planning on doing last night here tonight. So we do have a great show for you today. We'll be covering a number of things, first of which we're going to dive into a little bit of news in terms of Stefon Diggs signing with the Patriots a couple days ago. We didn't really get a chance to talk about that much, and we're going to go ahead and talk about that. And we're also going to dive into some top 5 rankings of both running backs and edge rushers. And also make sure that you stick around for later in the show for our College Corner segment. And I'm going to be doing a season preview of the Florida Gators football season coming up in just a few short months. So before we go ahead and get started on everything, as always, like I always do, I just want to ask that you guys like and follow the show. If you do have a question during the show, just go ahead and type that into the super chat, and then your voice can be heard whenever you type in that question. So always, if you've got a question, I absolutely encourage you to do that. Your input is a big part of what makes this show great. We thrive on your energy and your insights. Whether it's a quick comment, a thoughtful question, or an opinion that you just have to share, don't hesitate to drop it in the chat. Now, if you want to make absolutely sure your message stands out and gets featured on this show, there's an easy way to do that. Use the super chat feature. Just click the $ at the bottom of the chat box to send in your super chat. This guarantees that your message gets on the air, and it's also a fantastic way to support our channel. We rely on your support to keep bringing you the sports content that you love, and we appreciate every bit of it. So go ahead, let us know what you're thinking, hit that super chat button, and let's keep this show interactive and exciting. And if you prefer, you can also go to GSMCSports.net to tip, donate, and leave a comment or a question there. We couldn't do what we do without your amazing support, and we're so thankful to have you as part of our community. So again, the link is GSMCpodcast.net for those of you who want to hit up the super chat during the show. So let's go ahead and get started on our first segment of the day. We're going to be doing some NFL superlatives. But before we do get into that, I just want to quickly touch on the Stefon Diggs acquisition that the Patriots were able to do just a couple days ago. It's a 3-year deal, $69 million max deal that it is worth. I think that's a good move for the Patriots. I'm not crazy about the contract because coming off of an ACL for Stefon Diggs, and obviously he's a little bit older. He's still relatively in that prime segment, but he's probably on the back end of that prime. Also with the torn ACL, that does raise some questions as well. But the Patriots were pretty much hurting at wide receiver for a good number of years since Brady left. So I think this acquisition of Stefon Diggs definitely improves that room for sure. But whether or not it will lead to, them possibly getting, to the playoffs or something like that, that's a whole other story. But I like the move overall because I like what the Patriots are doing this offseason. I think they've really impressed, if all the way from their head coach. Getting Mike Vrabel, I think, is a great fit. Obviously, he played there for a number of years. So it's a great fit. He knows the organization, pretty well. So a lot of trust is there in the locker room with Mike Vrabel. And obviously he brought back Josh McDaniels as the offensive coordinator, which will greatly help Drake May. And McDaniels was the offensive coordinator for a good chunk of when Tom Brady was the quarterback, and Brady got along really well with him. And he has been known as a very good offensive mind. Hasn't had the best success as a head coach, but as a coordinator, he has always been very good. So I like what the Patriots are doing there. Obviously, they went and got Milton Williams from Philadelphia, so that's a good move too. And then getting Carlton Davis from the Lions to shore up that secondary a little bit. And they've still got Christian Gonzalez, the young corner there. So, that's going to be a pretty good secondary. Their defense was pretty solid last year, despite the fact that they didn't have a great overall year. Their defense usually is the strong point. And with Mike Vrabel being their head coach now, I don't think that will change much. I think the Patriots are going to be much better this year than they were last year. Whether or not they make the playoffs, like I said, that's kind of a whole other story, but I like what they're doing in the offseason so far, so I would expect an improved year out of the Patriots going forward. So that's my thoughts on the Stefon Diggs acquisition. So let's go ahead and get into the actual meat of the bones here. When we're talking about the first segment of the show, we're going to do our NFL superlatives, and we're going to start. And for those of you who don't know or are unfamiliar with superlatives, it's basically just players, coaches, situations that are most likely to, fill in the blank or whatever. So those are what they're all posed as. So as for an example, the first one that I have here is most likely to go 9-8 or 10-7 and get blown out of the playoffs. That would be the Pittsburgh Steelers and Mike Tomlin. I put that there as most likely because that just seems to be the case with the Steelers. That just seems to be what always happens under Mike Tomlin in recent years, and their just seemingly crazy desire to get Aaron Rodgers this offseason is not going to do anything to change that narrative. I think it's going to be a 9-8, 10-7 year if they're lucky, and then they get to the playoffs and then get blown out in the first round. The other day, when I was going through records and things of that nature, I had the Steelers finishing like 7-10 and getting their first their first losing season under Mike Tomlin. I still think that's a strong possibility, but I also think it's a strong possibility that they can get to 9-8 or 10-7 because that's just kind of what Mike Tomlin does overall. So I really don't really like what the Steelers are doing, and we're going to get into that a little bit in our mailbag section later on, but because there's some questions that are referring to that, but I don't like what I'm seeing from the Steelers so far, and that's why I have this as one of my superlatives. So moving on to the next part here, and most likely to win Rookie of the Year. I have running back out of Boise State, Ashton Jeanty, and that's mainly because he is the best running back coming out of the draft next month. And I think he's going to end up going to the Raiders, who are all of a sudden building a pretty solid team there with Pete Carroll and then Geno Smith as the quarterback there. And they desperately need a running back, and he is going to be an improvement over Alexander Mattison, who just got right around 400 yards rushing, and he was their leading rusher last year. So I think Ashton Jeanty will be a massive upgrade if they decide to go that route in the draft, which I think they will. A lot of people are kind of betting on the Raiders to pick up Ashton Jeanty. So a lot of people are going to want him if he's available, but I think the Raiders are the most likely fit, at their current position in the draft. So I like Ashton Jeanty. What he did last year at Boise State was, nothing short of spectacular. He had 26 touchdowns, over 2,000 yards rushing. He was very, very good, and he was in the runnings for Heisman. Didn't win it, of course, but he was right up there as, one of the best players in college football last year. And I think he has shown massive improvement over those 3 years that he was in college. Obviously, his first year at Boise, he didn't get a ton of carries. His next year, he was a little more productive, but not really where he wanted to be. And then, of course, his final season, he was, lights out and a Heisman finalist. So he was very, very good, and I think that'll continue in all of a sudden a much better running back situation in Vegas if they were to get him. They suddenly have a pretty solid looking offense there. Maybe get a couple of other players to pair with Jacoby Myers, and maybe they can be pretty good. I don't know. We'll see. I had them going to the playoffs, sneaking in as the third team in that division to get to the playoffs next year. So we'll see if that comes to pass. But that's the other one that I have. The next one on this list here is I have most likely coach to win Coach of the Year, and I think this kind of all boils down to what I was talking about in our last show when I was talking about bold predictions and, doing things of that nature. I have Ben Johnson, the coach of the Bears, being most likely to win Coach of the Year, just because there's been a lot of, publicity around the Bears with everything that they've been doing in the offseason, and I think they're setting themselves up to have a very good season. And Ben Johnson, obviously, his first year as a head coach, being the offensive coordinator for a number of years in Detroit and getting some very, very good success while he was there. So I like Ben Johnson. I like that move of them hiring him. That was the number one coach that was out there. That's what they needed to do. And even if it doesn't work, I think it was still the right move for the Bears to go after Ben Johnson. He was the big name guy. That's what they got to do. You got to go after the big name guy. Sometimes it doesn't work out, and that's just the way it is. But I think the Bears will be pretty good this year. And I, of course, if you watched the last show, I had them as one of my hot takes going to the NFC Championship game in a very similar season that the Commanders had last year, coming sort of out of nowhere. Not a lot of people expecting too much from them, although I do think the Bears have a little bit more expectations than the Commanders did last year, going into this year, of course. But the next one that I have on this list is most likely coach to get fired during the season, and I have Bill Callahan of the Tennessee Titans. You could also make the argument for Brian Daboll of the Giants, depending on how the Russell Wilson thing goes, and whether or not they decide to draft a quarterback in the first round, despite the fact that they just signed Jameis Winston and Russell Wilson to fill out that quarterback room. Don't think they're going to go quarterback in the first round based on what they did. So, that's the Giants. So I think it's a possibility the Giants could fire Brian Daboll if it starts to kind of snowball at the beginning of the year. But I think most likely would be Bill Callahan, just because the Titans, if you take a look at that team overall, I don't think there is much there for them to be very good this year. I mean, they will most likely draft Cam Ward, but Cam Ward was good in college, but we don't know what he's going to be like when he gets to the NFL. He's an unproven commodity. Until he laces them up and actually goes out onto the field in a regular season NFL game, we're not going to know how good he's going to be. It's very likely, well, not very likely, but it's very possible that he could end up being a bust and not be very good. Now, it's also very possible that he can come in and play sort of like how CJ Stroud had his first year and could light the league up and be very, very good and make that team one of the surprises of the year. But I don't see it happening because I don't like the rest of that team. I don't think there's enough around that team to really do much. Now, they're in a pretty easy division, but the Texans are the class of that division, so they're going to have to get past them, even though the Texans, I think, regressed a little bit last year. I don't think that's going to be the case this year. I think they play much better than they did last year this coming season, and it's just going to be tough for the Titans head coach Bill Callahan to keep his job because of another reason is the fact that they have a brand new GM this year in Tennessee, a GM who did not hire Bill Callahan. So I think that it won't take much if they start to look like they're going to have another season in which they're drafting near the top of the draft. I think you could see Bill Callahan get the axe, especially with a new GM. If they had the same GM, maybe he'd be safe for another year. But I think with that new GM, he's probably not going to tolerate too much failure, and he's going to want to just hit the ground running and try and get a good team fielded. So Callahan could be a scapegoat, or he could be a good reason why they, end up losing. But most likely, the next one, the most likely quarterback to get benched mid-season. Now, this one has two answers just because there is a quarterback competition, I think, in Indianapolis, and that is the two quarterbacks, Anthony Richardson and Daniel Jones. I think no matter who is named the starter, either one of those guys will end up being benched in the middle of the season because of poor play. Because I don't believe in Anthony Richardson. As a Gator fan, I watched him in college, never thought that he was going to be a lights-out quarterback. Sure, he has all the physical tools and the athleticism and all of that. He has all of those things, but he cannot read the field well. He's not good under pressure. If he gets an interception or two on his record, he gets in his head, and that just snowballs, But I've never really been the biggest fan of Anthony Richardson as a quarterback. I've never thought that he was worth as high as the coach drafted him. I thought they could have gotten a lot better players at that pick that they had, because they were fifth, if I remember correctly. They had the fifth overall pick when they snagged him from Florida, but I didn't agree with that. Still don't agree with them. And they've benched him several times since drafting him. They themselves, I don't think, believe in him fully. That's why they went and got Daniel Jones to compete with him. So that's that one. The last one I have, we'll make this real quick so not to drag this segment out too much, but the most likely player to win comeback player of the year, I have Christian McCaffrey Obviously, we all know he spent a good chunk of the year last year in Germany dealing with that injury and trying to get second opinions and all of that, and was, unable to really do much this year in terms of on-field productivity. He got in a couple games, but he wasn't very, effective because he was hurt all year. Only had like 200 yards total for the entire year. But this is still an incredible running back, and he just had a year that was just bogged down by a ton of injuries and other things. And I think he's going to be motivated this year to come back and play better. And I think he's going to have a pretty solid season, and he'll probably win Comeback Player of the Year. So those are my superlatives. I hope you guys enjoyed that. If you have any disagreements or anything like that, or one that maybe I forgot and you want to add on there, definitely let me know, and I'll shout it out here if I see it in the comments there. So before we get into our next segment of the show, we're going to take a quick commercial break, and we're going to be right back right after this, and we're going to get into some top 5, starting with running backs and then moving on to edge rushers later in the show. So stick around. We'll be right back.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign.